Uh, Welcome to Floorstocks. I am Kenneth Polcari, and joining me today is Dave Rosa, President and CEO of NeuroOne Medical Technologies, a company trading on the NASDAQ under the symbol NMTC. Now, NeuroOne is developing innovative technologies designed to improve the diagnosis and treatment of neurological conditions. And today, we're going to discuss the company's technology, their commercial strategy, recent developments, and the milestones that investors should be watching. But before we begin, this interview is for informational purposes only and not investment advice. Floorstocks has received compensation from NeuroOne Medical in connection with investor awareness and media services. Full compensation details are available at floorstocks.com/disclosures. So Dave, welcome to Floorstocks. It is a pleasure to have you. This is the first one for us on Floorstocks, so I'm great that you're with us. I look forward to this conversation. So let's start here. Let's assume that, anybody who's listening or watching this interview at the moment has never heard of NeuroOne, right? So tell me what I should know. Tell me what they should know. What does the company do, and what problem are you trying to solve?
Sure. And by the way, Kenny, thanks for having me on the show. Excited to be here today.
You're very welcome. Thank you. I look forward to this.
So what does NeuroOne do? So NeuroOne has developed a platform of what we refer to as thin film electrode technology, and I'm going to show the audience. So you can barely see, the
Right.
thickness of this. It's paper thin, and this is the other type of electrode that we make as well that is also small. And these devices were really intended to reduce the number of surgeries, patient hospitalizations, and also improve the clinical results for these patients that suffer from a variety of brain-related disorders, and also patients struggling with pain management, specifically lower back pain. I would bet that your audience has probably had some knowledge of the indications we target if they've heard about conditions like epilepsy, glioblastoma. So those are the nasty brain tumors that are very, very difficult to get rid of. And I'm sure, like myself, many of the audience has probably either suffered with themselves or know someone suffering with some sort of back pain. So we make devices to really improve patients' lives in those areas.
That's great, because one of the things that, kind of immediately caught my attention is that the technology isn't designed to just find the problem, right? It actually helps to treat the problem using that same platform. So talk a little bit about that, like for someone who's not a neurosurgeon, and I am not, and I'm sure many of the people watching are not. Explain why that is so meaningful.
Yeah, it's really critical. It's one of the major differences with our technology. And probably the best way to describe this is to give you an example. So prior to the company commercializing what we refer to as our 1RF technology, that's this device, that's our brain ablation technology. If you were a patient suffering with seizures, you would have to go in for a surgical procedure whereby they would put, I would say on average, about 15 of those devices through your skull into the brain. And they would use typically a robot to drill those holes before advancing the devices into the brain. And the goal of that procedure was to find the areas that were triggering the seizure so that it would make it easy for the neurosurgeon to remove the tissue triggering the seizures. Now, after that procedure was complete, the patient would be discharged, all those devices would be removed, and they would have to come back months later to have a second invasive surgery similar to that to destroy the tissue that they identified as triggering the seizure. So what that means, 2 surgeries, 2 hospitalizations, 2 trips to the operating room. The difference with our device is the patient gets implanted with one set of devices that combines both the diagnostic procedure, but as well as the ablation part of the procedure. And that's combined into one hospitalization, with the second procedure actually more than likely being performed at the patient's bedside, as opposed to another trip to the operating room. So really what this equates to, if you're a patient, is fewer hospitalizations, fewer trips to the OR, potentially better outcomes in terms of the clinical efficacy of the procedure, but also improved safety. If I only have to place these devices once into the brain, it just removes the risk, the level of risk of having to do it twice. So that's one of the major advantages.
If they're only going to the OR once, then it reduces the number of times somebody gets put under anesthesia. If they got to go 2, 3, 4 times, it's all that anesthesia as well. It never really works for a lot of people. So, I'm sure that's going to be a benefit in the end.
Sure. I mean, it has a direct impact on cost as well. The operating room is probably one of the most expensive costs when you're going through the surgery, just in essence, renting the operating room for the procedure. And look, like if you're a patient and you're struggling with epilepsy, it's bad enough to suffer, with the condition, than to be told, look, you're going to probably go through 2 surgeries where we're going to be drilling into the skull, placing these devices into your brain. You don't want that to occur once, let alone twice. So anything, that we can do to minimize that, I think, just allows the therapy to be available for more patients than if we were offering a similar type of technology where you had to go through this twice.
Right. Okay, so you've now reached this interesting point in the company's evolution, right? You've got 4 FDA cleared products, but you're also continuing to expand even that platform and those products. So walk us through where that stands today.
Yeah, where we are today is with the brain ablation platform for epilepsy that I was just describing. Zimmer Biomet is our exclusive commercial and distribution partner. We also have a similar system for what's called trigeminal neuralgia. Trigeminal neuralgia is a condition caused by the trigeminal nerve in the face. It causes severe facial pain. And one of the solutions for that is to ablate that nerve. So we have a separate system intended for that. And that system today, we just got started commercializing it, but we're doing that directly. So that's what we have today.
That sounds very exciting. But and looking forward, you've got these programs that involve drug delivery and multiple back pain therapies as well. So at this high level, where do those fit in terms of your long-term vision?
Sure. So most people wonder why a company that started in epilepsy is now looking at pain management therapies. The beauty of this technology is how I initially described it, a platform. It's a platform that you can adopt for many other therapeutic procedures as well as diagnostic procedures. And what we made the decision to do was focus on some of those that have larger markets than even epilepsy today. So maybe taking a look forward, I would say our drug delivery platform, we expect that to be available for animal research purposes, meaning testing, or any approved FDA study to deliver gene or cell therapies into the brain. And we expect that later this year. Again, it's using spin-off of the same device that we're using for brain ablation. Now, you mentioned back pain. Correct. We have 2 technologies that address back pain. One is attributed to what's referred to as the basivertebral nerve. That's a nerve in the spine that can cause lumbar or lower back pain. We expect to submit that system to the FDA next year. Again, that's leveraging the same ablation system that we're selling today in the brain, as well as for trigeminal neuralgia or facial pain. So that's the beauty of our technology, being able to adapt it for other applications. The final one, our spinal cord stimulation electrode, that's a little further out. That's still in development. So while you'll hear more about it over the coming year, that's not something we expect to be able to submit to FDA in 2027.
So let me ask the question, because I got a couple of questions out of that. The process, like the FDA process, does it take different amounts of time depending on what you're trying to get through? Is it years? Is it months? Is it decades? I mean, how long does it take to go through an FDA process?
I'm too old for it to be decades, Kenny.
Yeah, me too.
So we try to focus on technologies and indications that use a regulatory path known as a 510K application. And a 510K generally means that you're submitting a technology that has already been cleared by the FDA for a similar indication, as well as similar claims. So you can't basically file something through a 510K process if you're using it, if you're applying for, say, back pain, and you're saying, well, our technology will provide a therapy for back pain, but also cure cancer. So it has to be similar to something that's already been cleared. So to answer your question more directly about time, I'll use the most recent example. Our ablation system for trigeminal neuralgia, that's the facial pain. It took 4 months from the time we submitted it to the FDA before we received a clearance. That's a very short period of time. We also only had one question that came back from the FDA. So if you're submitting something like that under a 510K, I would say probably a good timeline to use would be 4 to 6 months from the time you submit it. Now, let's talk about this spinal cord stimulation electrode. It's intended to be an implantable device and last for years. That's going to require human clinical data. So you would imagine that the timeline for something like that is years. It's not 10 years with the right partner. It could be, 2 to 3 years from now.
Right. Let me ask a question about that. Is that spinal cord stimulation, are we talking about people who are paralyzed that will benefit from that? Or is it spinal cord stimulation because people, have back pain?
It's an excellent question. So back pain is one of those areas where the pain could be triggered by a number of different issues. So for spinal cord stimulation, that therapy really is intended for people that have chronic sciatic nerve pain. So that's the pain shooting down your leg that isn't controlled well by medications or injections. So that's really what that therapy is intended for. Basivertebral nerve ablation is also for lower back pain, but is literally due to the issue with the basivertebral nerve, and is very different. You treat that very different than you would the sciatic nerve pain.
Right. Okay. So okay, great. So the technology sounds fascinating, but getting this technology to hospitals and physicians is actually a whole nother issue, right? So you've got a commercial, and you said it yourself, a great commercial relationship with Zimmer Biomet. So talk about that partnership and how it developed into what it is and why it's so important for you going forward.
Yeah. So, maybe I'll start with the latter and work towards the former. So, look, it's challenging, for any emerging growth company, any micro cap, to be able to broadly hit the market and quickly penetrate whatever market you're trying to penetrate. When you have a partner, a larger partner that's committed to the same space that you are with a technology that's complementary, it can allow companies like NeuroOne to really hit that broad market much more quickly without needing the amount of capital or the risk associated with developing your own direct sales force. So This relationship started because Zimmer's robot, which is used again to drill the holes where our devices are placed through. Zimmer, we had to work with them to make sure that the size of our device, along with some of the accessories, would be compatible. So it started just with a pretty innocent conversation, asking them for some dimensions so that we could be compatible with their system. And for them, it was more about what else can we package with the robot, to really maximize the efficiency of our salespeople when they're in talking to the customer. So, we needed broad distribution. They needed a disposable technology that was complementary to the robot, and that's really how the relationship started.
And it has turned into really a fantastic relationship for you and for your business.
It absolutely has, and it really made sense in this space. Now, Zimmer, for some of the other therapies that I mentioned, they may not have an interest in that space. So it's not a partnership that would apply for everything that we're involved with, but certainly some of the technologies that we're developing, they would be interested in.
So let's shift gears for a minute and we'll talk about the business itself, because recently I understand you guys have joined the Russell Microcap Index. Now, for investors who may not appreciate why that's important, let me just lay it out, because it can actually be an important step in a company's evolution, right? It puts NeuroOne on the radar of a much broader group of institutional investors, including mutual funds, ETFs, portfolio managers that benchmark themselves against those Russell indexes, in this case, the microcap, right? So it can improve the company's visibility, expand their potential shareholder base, and really over time increase trading liquidity as index tracking funds need to purchase shares, right? It's certainly not a guarantee of future success, but it is another indication that the company has reached a stage where more institutional investors are beginning to take notice, right? So this was, I would imagine for you, a very meaningful milestone, but put it in perspective. And what do you think it means for NeuroOne going forward?
Yeah, I would love to recite what you just said, because I actually agree with your comments. When you talk about microcaps again, what investors want to talk about is liquidity. It's always a huge challenge, for obvious reasons. So, like you said, whether it's getting participation, say, from index funds that maybe track companies on the Russell Microcap Index, or maybe institutions that screen member index funds, they all have the potential to increase liquidity. And having a vehicle like this to gain that exposure, it's kind of like, I look at it like, just the entry ticket. You got to have that to be able to play and to be able to get exposure to organizations like that. And I do think it also lends some credibility, being recognized by the Russell Microcap Index. I agree with what you said. And, again, I think liquidity is really what, we're all after. And it certainly puts us on the radar. It puts more eyeballs on the company that might not have been there before.
The point that you made and the point that I made is that once you're in that index, then anybody who's following that index or using it as a benchmark has to have that has to be part of their holding. And so therefore it raises awareness. People are going to start to pay much more attention to what's going on there. And so net, I think it's a good thing. Like, again, it doesn't necessarily guarantee anything, but it does put you, in the arena, right?
Agreed.
So let's go to financial a little bit, because you have no debt. And one thing I think that investors can appreciate is that you've avoided this toxic financing structures that, sometimes plague these small cap companies, ones that, investors are always kind of looking at, well, how do you do this? How do you finance this? Where are the holes? So I'm assuming that was a conscious decision from the very beginning.
It really was. There's no shortage of institutions that, would be happy to put a debt deal in front of you and tell you that it's going to make investors feel a lot better. I can tell you my philosophy is somewhat different. My thought process was we want to have as clean a balance sheet as possible. So eliminating, debt or even, high levels of warrant coverage. Those are things that investors look at. But, you mentioned like toxic investors. When a high quality institutional investor or family office, looks at the investors on your cap table and they see names that, they don't want to see, it can really discourage them from acquiring your stock. So, there's just too many, what I would say, high quality micro caps that I've personally been involved with, or colleagues have been the CEO of those companies. And they were high quality companies that got significantly negatively impacted just because they had the wrong shareholders in the company, or because they took on too much debt, thinking that, the markets will recover much sooner. We can take on more debt. And some of them aren't even listed on NASDAQ anymore. Some of them, have merged or gone out of business altogether. So I think it's one of the significant advantages that we have. I don't want to call it a feature, but it is something that I'm proud of. And we've been able, at least since the get-go, to avoid having to do any of those things.
You don't want to call it a feature, but it's like a feature because, people can go and they can look at it, right? They can see what it looks like. They can see who's there. And to your point, the people that are there are not necessarily the people that, are the people that you want there, and not the people that, would create kind of that question mark, right?
Correct.
So let's talk about where you're headed. Let's talk about growth and kind of where you're headed, because you've reaffirmed your expectation for about $10.5 million in revenue this fiscal year, which ends in September, right? Your year goes from October 1 to September 30th. So you've also got an earnings call coming up on the 13th of August. So without getting ahead of those results, just talk a little bit about what gives you confidence in kind of where the business is going next year into 2027, kind of where you're feeling really good.
Yeah, I would say, it revolves around diversification. So it's, we started out as a company really being focused on developing a solution for epilepsy. And epilepsy is a tremendous opportunity. The amount of patients in the United States alone that suffer with this, that can't be treated effectively with medications. It's over 1 million patients, but it's still underpenetrated. Again, it's not something you voluntarily sign up for or look forward to. It's pretty intimidating thinking that a surgeon's going to be drilling holes through your skull, putting these wires into your brain and burning brain tissue. No one's going to be excited about that. So that market and the growth of that market is much different than, for example, pain management. So if you've got back pain and gosh, you can't get out of bed, you can't go back to physical activities, it's limiting your lifestyle. And I tell you, well, look, we're going to put a wire, into your lower back, and we're going to, destroy the nerve that is causing you the pain. I mean, people that have lower back pain, and I'm one of those people, I'd sign up for that immediately. It's not as intimidating as when you think about brain surgery. And those markets, specifically for that basivertebral nerve ablation, are growing rapidly. There's some of the highest growth lower back pain procedures that are occurring today. So, to be able to have a play in that. And then, when you look towards the future, look, I think if you interviewed any neurologist or any neurosurgeon about is the future going to include gene therapies or cell therapies, they would all say yes. And we want to be involved in that. And being able to not only offer the neurosurgeon technology to ablate brain tissue to treat these patients with epilepsy, but also to give them the opportunity to deliver an injection, maybe one injection into the brain that could either cure that or improve that condition. It's all about building this toolbox so that we can so that we can participate in some of these what are expected to be larger growth markets in the future, I think is critical. So, when you sum it all up, what you see is, a company that's got multiple shots on goal and multiple opportunities to grow our business without having to reinvent the wheel. If we had to, redesign the technology for every one of these applications, I would say, gosh, the company, should have better focus. But these are not major changes that we have to make to adapt it for these currently larger growth markets.
What would be, in your mind, the milestones that an investor should be paying attention to over the course of, say, the next 12 to 24 months? And meaning, how is this story going to unfold in terms of what you expect?
Yeah, look, we have to execute, right? We need to continue the growth of the brain ablation platform. So keeping an eye on revenues for that. The growth of the trigeminal neuralgia ablation system, while that's a smaller market, it's still very synergistic with brain ablation because the surgeon that performs brain ablation performs the facial ablation. The submission of our basivertebral, lower back pain system next year, that'll be a critical milestone. I mentioned that we're going to be releasing our drug delivery platform later this year for animal testing and FDA approved human studies. And then, we've had discussions with potential partners for some of these technologies, keeping an eye out for any announcements on new partnerships. I would say those are the major ones.
I thought very exciting, and excited not only to meet you, but excited to hear about kind of what's going on there. I would imagine that you've got a bunch of people in the baby boomer age that's always waking up with a backache, becoming clients every time I get out of bed. I'm like, oh my God, my back is killing me, right? But no, listen, I thought it was a great conversation. I was excited to hear about what you're doing, where you're going, the excitement that you have, and kind of what the future looks like. So thank you for joining us and giving the audience kind of a closer look at NeuroOne Medical, its technology, the commercial strategy, and the milestones that you see ahead. Now, to everybody watching, NeuroOne Medical Technology does trade on NASDAQ under the symbol NMTC. Right? We encourage the viewers to learn more by visiting the company's official website and reviewing the public filings with the SEC. And again, today's discussion was for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Floorstocks has received compensation for NeuroOne Medical Technologies with investor awareness and media services, and their full compensation details are available on their website, floorstocks.com/disclosures. Dave, we appreciate the time, and I look forward to following up with you in maybe 4 or 5 months. I'm Kenny Polcari, and this has been an exclusive Floorstocks CEO interview where community meets Wall Street. Thank you very much for watching. Dave, thank you very much. Yeah.